There was once a baker who had a shop in a small town in America. This baker was not a very kind man. He never gave his customers any more bread than necessary for their money, and he never smiled. But he was a very good baker. His bread was the softest bread that you could imagine. Sometimes customers paid for their bread and started eating it there in the shop. And his cakes, his cakes were really delicious. People came to his shop from all over town. When they walked down the street, they smelled the baker's wonderful bread and his delicious cakes, and they walked right into his shop. But not everyone came inside. Some people just stood outside the shop, smelling and looking in through the windows. The baker didn't like this.
Their stomachs are full of the smell of my bread. I'm giving them a free lunch, and I get nothing for my hard work,
he said to himself.
Perhaps there's some way to put those delicious smell in bottles. Then I can sell them, just like I sell my bread.
One winter morning, very early, the baker was in his shop making bread. He wasn't singing happily while he worked. He was complaining to himself about getting up early, about the cold weather, and about anything that came into his head. In the middle of all this, he looked up and saw someone looking in through the window. It was a young man wearing an old coat. He was looking at the baker's bread, and he was hungry. He was smelling the fresh bread and smiling. When the baker saw him, he felt very angry.
That thief outside my shop has a stomach full of the smell of my bread. It's a free breakfast. I get nothing for my hard work, while he steals my smells.
The man didn't move. He just stood there, closed his eyes, and smelt the fresh bread happily. The baker was really angry now.
Pay you for what?
Asked the young man in great surprise.
For the smells that you've stolen,
replied the baker.
But I've stolen nothing. I'm only smelling the air. Air is free,
said the hungry young man.
It's not free when it's full of the smells from my shop,
replied the baker.
Pay me now, or I'll call the police.
When the young man didn't pay, the baker took him by the coat and pulled him through the snow to the judge's house. He knocked on the door. After a long time, the judge opened the door in his night clothes. He looked at the baker and the hungry young man standing outside in the street. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. What could be so important so early in the day?
This man is a thief. He stole the smells from my shop,
said the baker. The judge was surprised, but all he said was,
Come in and tell me your story. But first give me time to dress myself.
He went back into the house. After a few minutes he came back, and he took them inside. They all sat down together round a large table.
All right, tell me everything. Baker, you start,
said the judge. He listened quietly. First the baker told him all about the hungry man who stole all his smells. The judge went on listening. Then the young man told him that air was free, and that any man could have as much as he wanted. When they finished telling their stories, the judge was silent for a few minutes. The baker started telling him again of how the other man took all his smells without paying.
Stop. Be quiet. I've decided what we'll do,
said the judge.
Young man, do you have any money?
The young man put his hand in his pocket and took out a few coins. He showed them to the judge and said,
Sir, this is all the money that I have in the world.
Give those coins to May.
said the judge. The young man put them into the judge's hand.
I've listened carefully to both your stories.
Began the judge.
It's true that the smells were coming out of the baker's shop. And these smells belonged to the baker. And it's also true that this young man took those smells without paying for them. And so I say that the young man has to pay the baker for the smells that he took.
The baker smiled, perhaps for the very first time in his life. He held out his hand at once for the money. But the judge didn't give him the coins.
Baker, listen and listen carefully.
He said. He shook the coins in his hands, and they clinked together.
That can pay for the smells.
He said to the baker.
Give me my coins, sir.
Said the baker, not smiling any more.
No,
Said the judge.
I've decided that the sound of money is the best way to pay for the smell of bread.
And with that, he gave the coins back to the poor young man and told him to go home.
Chapter 1. A Night Out at Maxim's. Jennifer looked at the clock on the waiting room wall. Nearly 8:30. The light was still on in Dr. Gibson's room.
I'm going to be late.
She said to herself.
Why doesn't he hurry up?
The evening surgery was always busy on Thursdays, but tonight was worse than usual. She quickly put the newspapers in a cupboard. Then she took off her white coat and locked it in the cupboard too. She was turning off the lights when someone rang the front doorbell. Oh no, not another patient, not at this hour. She ran to the door and opened it. Outside it was dark, but she could see a man, his hands deep in his pockets. He moved his head and the light fell on his face.
Richard,
She cried in surprise.
what are you doing here?
Can I come in for a minute?
He did not wait for an answer, but pushed past her and went inside. Jennifer turned to him. She was usually pleased when Richard called, but this was the wrong time.
I'm sorry, but you can't stay. I must hurry. I'm meeting my friend Claire for dinner and...
She stopped. It was Richard's eyes. They looked tired and worried.
What's the matter?
She asked. Just then Dr. Gibson called from his room.
Did I hear the doorbell, nurse? Was it another patient?
No, it's only my brother Richard.
She called back. She turned back to Richard.
Is something wrong?
She asked again. He shook his head.
I'm fine.
He said.
It's just. Well, I had some trouble at work.
Trouble.
It was nothing, really. I said something to my boss and he didn't like it. He got angry with me and in the end he told me to go. So I've lost my job.
Oh, Richard, not again. Why do you do these things?
Jennifer was beginning to feel cross with him.
And now you have no money. Is that it?
Take it easy, Jenny. I don't need very much. Only 20 pounds. I'll pay you back next week, really I will.
He put his hand on her arm.
You can do that for me, can't you? Just 20 pounds. It's for a present.
Yes, I know. A present for a very special girl, like the last one. And the one before.
Jennifer knew her young brother well and she was often angry with him, but she could never say no to him. She opened her bag, took out some money and gave it to him.
But remember, I want it back next week.
Richard smiled and put his arm around his sister.
Thanks, Jenny. This is different. Really. She's very, very special. But you're in a hurry, so I'll go now.
Don't forget.
She called after him.
Next week, 20 pounds.
Maxim's restaurant was busy, young men and women from offices, several older people, a group of students, and a few theater people. Jennifer looked around for her friend. Claire usually sat near the window, but tonight she was not there. Somebody was having a party and all the tables on that side were full. Then Jennifer heard Claire's voice behind her.
Did you get lost? I've been here for hours.
I know I'm late,
Jennifer said.
and I am sorry. Today has been really busy. The last patient didn't leave until 8:30. And then I had a visit from Richard. He wanted to borrow some money. He always wants to borrow money.
They went to an empty table. A waiter came up to them and took their orders. At that moment there was a cheer from the party beside the window. An older man in a light gray suit was standing up. He spoke for a few minutes and then held up his glass. All the others stood up and looked at a young girl with large gold earrings, who was sitting in the chair next to him. Everyone was laughing, and then they began to sing Happy Birthday to You. They were all looking at the girl, but she herself just sat there without a smile on her face. The song came to an end, and there was another loud cheer and more laughing and shouting. Someone called out 21 today, 21 today. And this time everyone in the restaurant sang too. Suddenly there was a loud crash. Then someone screamed and a voice shouted.
Bring a towel quickly.
The man in the gray suit was lying across the table. He was holding his face, which was red with blood. On the table there was broken glass. Someone said in a loud voice.
What happened? Did he fall?
Several people were speaking at the same time.
It's his heart, you know. Joe's been in and out of hospital for years. I has had hit those glasses.
The man was still lying across the table. Jennifer jumped up, and both she and Claire ran over to him.
We're nurses.
Said Jennifer.
Can we help?
There was a cut on the side of the man's face. It was deep and he was losing a lot of blood. A waiter ran up with a towel. Jennifer took it and held it to the cut. The man's mouth was open and he was making strange noises.
He needs a doctor. We'll have to get him to hospital.
Jennifer said. She turned to Claire.
You came here in your car, didn't you?
Yes, come on, we'll take him.
Claire replied. They helped the man outside and put him in Claire's car. Jennifer jumped in beside him and they drove off. She was still holding the towel to the man's face. The blood was not coming so fast now and he was beginning to feel a little better.
Where are we going?
He asked.
Are you taking me home?
Just stay there and don't speak.
Jennifer told him.
You fell and hurt yourself. You'll be all right, but you must see a doctor. We'll be at the hospital in a few minutes.
At the word hospital, the man immediately tried to sit up.
No.
He said angrily.
I don't need to go to hospital. I'm feeling better now. Just take me home. And who are you?
I'm a nurse,
Jennifer told him.
and you need to see a doctor. We're nearly there now. Just sit still and stop talking.
But the man was feeling stronger now and he would not be quiet. He pulled at Jennifer's arm and said loudly.
I don't need a doctor. It's just a small cut on my face. I'm all right now. Take me home.
When Jennifer did not answer him, he said in a quieter voice.
Come on now, listen to me. I'm feeling fine, really I am. There's no need to take me to hospital. They'll want to keep me there. They always do because of my bad heart. You see, I have to meet some business people the day after tomorrow. It's very important. So just stop the car and I can get a taxi home.
By now the car was at the door of the hospital. A nurse came to meet them, and while Claire told her about the accident, Jennifer helped the man out of the car. He said something angrily to the nurse, but after a few seconds he went with her into the hospital. Jennifer and Claire drove away,
What a difficult man.
said Claire crossly.
No? Thank you for your help. Or, you're very kind. Some people never say thank you.
Jennifer said.
Don't worry about it.
When they got back to Maxim's, a police car was standing outside, with its blue light on. There was a small group of people around the door. Jennifer pushed through them, Claire behind her. They tried to go inside. A policeman moved forward and put up his arm.
You'll have to wait here.
He told them,
But we ordered dinner. And we haven't eaten yet.
said Claire. But the policeman was not listening to them. He was looking through the glass door. Something was happening inside and people were moving about. Then one of Maxim's waiters opened the door and two policemen came out. They were holding a young girl between them. It was the girl from the birthday party, the girl with the unhappy face and the expensive gold earrings. The police pushed her into the back of their car and drove away quickly. Jennifer and Claire looked at each other. What an evening. They waited 2 or 3 minutes, but the restaurant door was closed now and the policeman was standing in front of it again. Neither of them felt hungry anymore. They walked slowly towards the car. Claire was the first to speak.
Come on, Jenny. Let's enjoy ourselves. We're having a night out.
Jennifer did not speak. Claire went on.
Do you remember Maxim's little song on TV? She began to sing. Come where the music's wonderful. Come where the food is fine. Let's all meet at Maxim's. We'll have a wonderful time.
She stopped. Jennifer was not pleased.
All this is not really my idea of a wonderful time.
She said.
I'm tired and I wanted a nice quiet evening, a good meal, and an early night.
Come on.
Claire replied.
Let's go to another restaurant.
No, let's leave it till next week. I'll just walk home now.
They said goodbye. Claire got into her car and called.
See you next week, then.
Jennifer walked slowly home. She felt unhappy and worried about her young brother, Richard. She remembered his visit to the surgery earlier that evening. He was always in and out of jobs, and never had any money. A year ago he had a little trouble with the police, but Richard did not worry about it. He never worried about anything. He just laughed, and came to Jennifer to ask for more money. Both their parents were dead, and there were no other brothers or sisters. So Jennifer, 15 years older than Richard, worried about her brother a lot. She went past a jewelry shop with its lights on, and stopped to look in the window for a minute. She saw some earrings and then remembered the gold earrings on the girl at Maxim's. They were large and looked very expensive, and they looked all wrong next to that small unhappy face. Where did she get them? Jennifer smiled to herself. Perhaps the police were asking that question now. Chapter 2: A Visit from the Police. Jennifer did not sleep well that night. She woke up feeling tired and unhappy. When she arrived at Dr. Gibson's surgery, she looked into the waiting room. It was nearly full. Another busy morning, she said to herself. Just then she heard the doctor's car outside. He hurried in and went into his room. 3 hours later, he finished with his last patient. Jennifer brought a cup of coffee and put it on Dr. Gibson's desk. He said thanks and she turned to go.
Yar, just a minute.
He called after her.
I want a word with you.
He sounded a little cross.
There was a phone call for you this morning, about an hour ago. You were busy at the time, so I answered it.
Oh, who was it?
Let me see, I wrote it down somewhere.
He began to move the papers on his desk.
She said that she was a friend of your brother's.
My brother? But why did she want me?
Oh, here it is.
He gave Jennifer a piece of paper. On it was a name, Wendy.
She didn't leave a number. She'll call you again at home.
Jennifer looked at the name.
Wendy. Wendy who?
She asked herself.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson.
She said.
And tell her, please, no phone calls during surgery hours.
I'm sorry. It won't happen again.
Jennifer wanted to explain that she did not know this Wendy but decided not to. A few minutes later, Dr. Gibson shouted goodbye to her and Jennifer was alone. She knew a few of Richard's friends, but nobody called Wendy. But Richard changed his girlfriends as often as his shirts. Jennifer did not try to remember all their names. At the end of the day, Jennifer arrived at her flat and was going up the stairs when she heard voices above. 2 men were standing outside her door. One of them came up to her.
Miss Walton?
He asked.
My name's Detective Barrett. I'd like to ask you a few questions, please. Can we come in?
She turned the key in the lock and pushed open the door, and all 3 of them went inside and sat down.
It's about Mr. Richard Walton. He's your brother, I think.
Barrett began. He spoke softly, but he had a hard voice, cold and unfriendly, and his light blue eyes never left Jennifer's face.
When did you last see him?
Jennifer told him.
And before that? I'm not sure. About 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Those light blue eyes were still on her. She was beginning to feel uncomfortable.
You didn't see him last weekend, then?
No.
Try to remember, did he come here last Saturday? In the evening?
No.
You're sure?
Yes, of course I'm sure.
Barrett's voice became a little louder.
You didn't meet him in some other place? At the airport, perhaps?
No, I didn't. I haven't seen him for nearly a month, I tell you. Until last night, I mean.
Last night.
Barrett said after her.
Tell us more about last night. You took a man to hospital. From Maxim's restaurant.
Yes.
A friend of yours.
I never saw him in my life before. He fell and hurt himself. They said that he had a bad heart, so I went to the hospital with him. That's all.
You never saw him before? You surprise me, Miss Walton.
Barrett was watching her carefully.
You didn't know that he was Mr. Joe Kelly, your brother's boss?
No, I didn't.
Really? You didn't know him? Very strange, don't you think?
All these questions. She was feeling angry now. She stood up and went across to Barrett.
Look, Detective Barrett, I'm getting tired of this. What's it all about? You want me to answer your questions and you don't tell me why. What's the matter? I want to know. Is Richard in trouble?
Barrett held up his hands.
All right, take it easy.
He gave a little smile, but his eyes were cold, and he was still looking hard at Jennifer. The other detective said something quietly to Barrett. Then Barrett went on.
Your brother, what do you know about his girlfriend?
His girlfriend?
Yes, Wendy. He works with her at Joe Kelly's.
Wendy. The mystery telephone call at the surgery that morning. Jennifer tried to hide her surprise. She looked first at Barrett, then at the other man. Then she said coldly,
Richard doesn't talk to me about his girlfriends.
He's told you about Wendy, I'm sure. They're very friendly, the two of them. They went to Germany together.
He turned to the other man.
Last weekend, wasn't it?
The second detective moved a little nearer and spoke quietly to Barrett.
She doesn't know anything about this. You'll have to explain it to her.
Barrett turned to Jennifer again.
We're looking for some stolen jewelry from Germany. And we believe that your brother knows something about it. You won't like this, Miss Walton, but your brother works for a criminal, a thief, and one of these days he's going to find himself in trouble.
But my brother lost his job yesterday. He told me last night. So he doesn't work for this man anymore.
Barrett smiled.
Perhaps he doesn't. Or perhaps he wants people to think that he doesn't work for Kelly.
He went on.
If you don't want to see your brother in prison, tell him to keep away from Kelly. And from beautiful young girls like Wendy.
Jennifer looked at him and said nothing. Barrett stood up. He looked at the other man and they both moved to the door. Jennifer followed and opened it for them.
Good night, Miss Walton. Thanks for your help.
They walked to the top of the stairs. Jennifer waited for a few seconds, then went inside and closed the door. Oh, Richard, she thought.
What is happening? What are you doing? Why can't you stay out of trouble?
She telephoned Richard's flat, but there was no answer. So she went to bed and worried half the night about her young brother. The next day, Saturday, she worked only in the morning. When Dr. Gibson's surgery finished, she went home to have lunch. Then she planned to go round to Richard's flat and talk to him. But when she got into her flat, the telephone was ringing. She ran across the room and answered it.
Hello, is that Jennifer Walton?
Someone asked. It was a girl's voice.
Yes, Jennifer here. Who's speaking?
The caller was silent for a second or two, then said,
You don't know me, but I'm a friend of your brother's. Are you free just now? I need to see you. It's important.
She went on quickly.
I'm just round the corner from your flat. Can I come up? I'll be there in 3 minutes.
And she put the phone down. Jennifer was waiting at the door when her visitor arrived. She looked at her in surprise. She knew that face. It was the young girl from Maxim's, but without the gold earrings today. The girl was also surprised.
I saw you at Maxim's on Thursday night.
She said,
You took Joe Kelly to hospital. Are you Jennifer, Richard's sister?
Yes,
said Jennifer. She looked at her visitor and began to put two and two together.
and you must be Wendy.
Yes.
The girl said. Jennifer stood back, and the girl went inside. They sat down and Jennifer looked at the girl coldly. So this was Richard's girlfriend, who worked for the criminal, Joe Kelly. She had a beautiful little face and looked very unhappy, but Jennifer did not want to like her.
What do you want to see me about?
She asked.
It's difficult to explain.
The girl began. She looked unhappily at Jennifer's unfriendly face.
You see, Richard has told me about you. He says that you're very kind. You always help him. He gave me your phone numbers and said.
She stopped, and Jennifer waited.
He said that I could ask you for help.
Jennifer smiled to herself. Always the kind big sister, she thought. She looked at the girl's small, worried face.
Well, go on, then.
She said more kindly.
Tell me all about it. I hope that Richard's not in trouble.
You see, I work for Joe Kelly.
Wendy began. She talked for a long time, and Jennifer listened carefully. This was Wendy's story. Chapter 3, Wendy's story. Kelly is not a nice man, and I've never liked him. I've worked for him for a year now. My father got the job for me. He told me to work hard and not to ask questions. Kelly often gets angry, and when he's angry, he shouts at everyone and his face goes very red. I'm afraid of him, but I don't want to lose my job. I need the money and it's not easy to find another job. Richard started work at Kelly's about a month ago. We're good friends, but we don't talk much about our jobs. Nobody at Kelly's talks about the work. We don't really know what his business is. He has 2 garages in the town and he buys and sells old cars. But he also buys and sells a lot of other things, too: furniture, old pictures, jewelry. I think that some of these things are stolen, but I don't ask questions. 10 days ago, Kelly called me into his office. I stood there and waited. He began to say something to me, but he stopped and looked down at his papers. Then he took out his diary and opened it.
Wendy, what are you doing next weekend?
I'm not sure, Mr. Kelly.
How would you like to go on a little business trip? I'll pay you for it, of course.
This surprised me, and I did not reply immediately. Then I said,
A business trip, Mr. Kelly?
Yes, to Germany. Just for the day. It isn't a difficult job, but it's important. What do you say?
I did not know much about Mr. Kelly's business, but I did know that there was something strange about these journeys to other countries. They happened every 2 or 3 months, and after them there were secret meetings in the office, often late in the evening. I decided that I did not want to go.
But I've never been to Germany. Don't you think? Well, perhaps you can ask one of the others.
I'm asking you, Wendy. I said that it was important, and I want you to do it.
I began to say something, but he was still speaking.
I have friends in Frankfurt, and they want to send me some things. They'll give you 3 small boxes, like egg boxes, and you'll bring them back here. There's nothing difficult about that, is there?
I didn't say anything.
Are you listening to me, Wendy? He asked. I need you to do this job for me.
His voice was getting louder now. I looked him in the face.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kelly. I've just remembered. I'm busy next weekend. I can't do it.
He jumped up and his chair fell back.
Now, just you listen to me, young woman. You work for me, remember that. I'm the person who pays you.
He caught my arm and shook me.
This time I'm telling you, not asking you. You'll go to Frankfurt or there'll be trouble. You will leave on the first plane on Saturday morning and come back the same evening. With the 3 boxes. And don't say a word to anyone, do you understand?
Then he walked out. I didn't sleep much that night, or the next. I wanted to tell Richard, but he was out of town on another of Kelly's jobs. What could I do? I was afraid. And Kelly knew that I was afraid. He did not speak about it again, but on Friday he called me into his office and gave me my plane ticket and some money. There was no escape. Saturday morning came, and I went to the airport. While I was waiting there, I heard my name. I knew that voice immediately. I turned round.
Richard.
I cried.
Oh, Richard, the first, so pleased to see you. But what are you doing here?
I'm coming with you. To Frankfurt. Kelly told me to. Look, here's my ticket.
You mean? Wait a minute. What did Kelly tell you?
Richard was smiling.
He told me to come with you, that's all. To stay with you. You know, on the plane. And in Frankfurt.
I began to understand.
He told you to watch me, you mean?
When we were on the plane, Richard asked me about my work at Kelly's. He knew very little about Kelly's business, and he knew very little about our trip to Frankfurt. I told him about the egg boxes and why I was afraid.
The boxes are small, Kelly said, so I think it's jewelry.
I told Richard.
And I think it's stolen jewelry.
Then Richard got very angry and said,
Kelly can't send you on a job like this. Why doesn't he go himself?
But that's it, Richard. It's easier for a girl, Kelly knows that. He's clever, you know. But he thinks I'm afraid. So he sent you to watch me.
For a time, Richard just sat there and thought. After a while, he turned to me.
You're not going to do it. You're not going to carry stolen jewelry for that man. Leave it to me. I'll think of something, of some plan.
Then he was silent again. When we arrived in Frankfurt, we went to a hotel for breakfast. Then Richard went off to buy a newspaper, and after that we sat around for about half an hour. We had to meet Kelly's friends outside the hotel. When we walked out of the door, 2 men were waiting for us in a white Mercedes. We drove through the busy streets of the city and then into the country. Some time later, we stopped at an old house with trees all around it. We all went inside and the men took us into a dark room at the back and left us there. It was cold and Richard gave me his coat. He was smiling quietly to himself. We waited there in silence. In another room, people were talking. We could hear their voices. Then the driver of the Mercedes came and took us upstairs. A short man in a dark green shirt was sitting at a desk. In front of him on the desk were 3 boxes. He was playing with a pen and watching us carefully. Richard spoke to him in German. I did not understand, but I heard Kelly's name and the man in the green shirt began to say something. All at once there were noises outside, the sound of cars and voices and people running. The man jumped up from his desk and pulled a gun out of his pocket. He tried to get to the window, but at that minute the door opened and 3 or 4 policemen ran in and jumped on him. There was a fight, but the police got his gun from him and held him on the floor. An older man arrived, a police inspector with gray hair, and began to give orders to the policemen. He called across the room to Richard and me in very good English.
Are you all right? They didn't hurt you, did they?
He gave some more orders and then he came across to Richard and held out his hand.
Well done, young man. I must thank you for your help.
He turned to me.
And thank you too. You've done very well, both of you. It's been a good day's work for all of us.
I looked at Richard and he gave me a little smile.
What does he mean?
I asked, but Richard did not answer. The inspector then explained to me.
Your friend phoned us this morning from your hotel. After that, it was easy. We just waited near the hotel for the white Mercedes and then followed it here.
The inspector took us back into Frankfurt in his car, and when we arrived there, we went at once to his office. He ordered coffee for us, and while we were waiting for it, he said,
You've helped us a lot already, but we need your help with one more thing. There's still Mr. Kelly. And his friends. We have a plan for them.
Oh yes, he knew all about Joe Kelly.
He brought out the 3 boxes and put them on the table in front of us. Then he said,
We would like you to take these back to England with you.
Richard and I looked at him in surprise. The inspector waited for a minute and then went on.
You don't need to be afraid. Perhaps you're thinking about the British police, is that it? Everything will be all right. I will speak to Chief Superintendent Edwards in London, and there'll be no trouble for you. Now listen carefully.
He went on.
Just give the jewelry to Kelly. He won't know about the accident to his German friends, and you must not tell anybody about it, or about our conversation today. That's very important. The British police will watch Kelly and wait. Do you understand?
This plan sounded dangerous to me, but Richard said,
Yes, of course we'll do it, won't we, Wendy?
Richard is not afraid of Kelly, you see. So we brought the boxes back with us on the Saturday evening plane from Frankfurt. We did not get back until nearly midnight, but we took the boxes at once to Kelly's house. He told us to wait and then went into another room. When he came back, he was very happy. He put his hand in his pocket and took out some gold earrings.
These are for you, Wendy, for your birthday next Thursday.
No, Mr. Kelly, no, you mustn't. I can't take them, really I can't.
Of course you can.
Kelly laughed.
You've worked hard for them. And we must have a party for you. Let's get some people together on Thursday night. Where would you like to go? To the Ritz? Or perhaps a disco? No, I know.
And he began to sing.
Let's all meet at Maxim's. We'll have a wonderful time.
I told him 3 times that I didn't want a party, but he didn't want to listen. He was too pleased with himself.
Oh, yes, Wendy. We must have a party. And you must wear the earrings. Then, I'll know you're my good little girl.
His mouth was smiling, but his eyes were cold. Richard said quietly in my ear,
Just agree with him, Wendy. And take his earrings, you can give them back later. We don't want anything to go wrong now.
The next few days passed very slowly. On Monday and Tuesday everything was quiet in the office. Kelly did not speak to me again about the visit to Frankfurt. He stayed in his office most of the time and was always on the telephone. No police came to the office, and nothing happened. I began to feel afraid. Early on Wednesday morning, Richard called in to see me.
Is he in yet?
He asked. He looked at Kelly's door.
Not yet. Why?
I want the keys to his office. Just for a minute.
But Richard,
Come on, Wendy, he'll never know.
you can't go in there, Richard. He'll be here in a minute. It's too dangerous.
Please, Wendy. It won't take long. I'll be out again immediately.
But why? What do you want?
Don't ask questions. Just give me the keys, quickly.
Of course, in the end, I gave him the keys. He opened Kelly's door and went inside. Some minutes passed and then he gave a shout. I think I've got something. I went in and saw that Richard was standing in front of Kelly's desk with a letter in his hand. He held it up for me.
This
He said,
is going to help us.
What do you mean? I did not understand.
Listen.
He read from the letter. The eggs arrived last weekend and they are now in my house. Be there on the 18th of April 2011 a.m.
The 18th?
I said.
That's next Saturday.
Just then I heard a car outside.
That's him.
I cried.
Quick, put that letter back. You must get out of here at once.
I ran through to my office with Richard behind me.
Out there, quick.
I pushed him into the kitchen, and at the same time the door opened and Kelly walked in.
Good morning, Wendy.
He did not stop, but went into his office and closed the door behind him. Richard then quickly left the office and I did not see him again that day. He phoned me the next afternoon, which was Thursday. I knew at once that he was unhappy about something. Chapter 4, Another Birthday Present. Jennifer felt very sorry for Wendy. The girl's hands were shaking, and she was trying not to cry. Jennifer went and sat next to her, and put her arm round her.
So what happened after the party on Thursday night, when the police took you away?
She asked quietly.
Oh, it was terrible.
Wendy said.
They took the earrings from me, of course, and they asked a lot of questions. I told them that the earrings were a present from Kelly, and I told them all about the police in Germany, but they didn't believe me. They told me to go to the office on Friday, and not to say anything to anybody. And they wanted to talk to Richard.
Wendy turned to Jennifer.
What am I going to do?
She asked.
Why didn't the police believe me? Haven't the German police talked to them? And where's Richard? I can't find him.
She began to cry quietly. Jennifer stood up.
We must phone the police in Germany.
She said.
I'll talk to that policeman, Barrett, who came to see me last night, and...
Just then there was a knock on the door. Jennifer went to the door and called out.
Who is it?
It's me, Richard.
Came Richard's excited voice. Jennifer opened the door quickly. Beside Richard there were 2 policemen, Barrett and another taller man.
Everything's okay.
Richard said happily. He turned to the two policemen and smiled.
And you're not going to lock me up, are you?
I'm very pleased to hear that.
Said Jennifer.
But what's going on? Can somebody please explain?
They all went into the sitting room, and Wendy jumped up. She looked at the policeman and her face went white. Everybody began talking at once, and Richard put his arms round Wendy. The tall policeman laughed and turned to Jennifer.
My name is Edwards,
he said.
I'm sorry about Barrett's visit to you last night, but we didn't know about Richard and Wendy then. I talked to the Frankfurt police an hour ago. We already knew about the stolen jewelry in Germany, of course, and we were watching Kelly. But they didn't tell us that they caught the German thieves last weekend, or about their little plan with Richard and Wendy. They wanted to keep it very secret. They were afraid that Kelly would hear about it. But we know now, and everything's all right.
But what about Kelly?
Cried Wendy.
And the egg boxes?
Barrett smiled.
You'll have to find a new boss. Kelly is going to be in prison for a long time. We got him this morning. But it's Richard's story. He's been very helpful to us. He can tell you all about it.
The two policemen left, and Jennifer turned to her young brother. He was sitting with his arm round Wendy, and her face was now bright and happy.
Well,
Jennifer said.
Start talking, Richard.
I've told Jennifer all about last week.
Wendy explained.
And she was in Maxim's on Thursday night. But what happened this morning?
Richard laughed.
When I looked in Kelly's office last Wednesday, I found that letter about the eggs. You remember, Wendy? Well, the German policeman told us to do nothing, but I wanted the British police to catch Kelly. Perhaps they were watching Kelly carefully, but I wanted to be sure. So early this morning I went to the police station and told them about the letter. They were not very friendly and they kept me in the police station. But they went to Kelly's house at 11 o'clock. They found Kelly there and two other men who were buying the stolen jewelry from Kelly. So they brought Kelly and the two other men into the police station. And the egg boxes, of course. Kelly was very angry and told the police that Wendy and I were the thieves. I told Barrett and Edwards about the German policeman's plan again and again, and in the end they telephoned Germany and talked to the inspector in Frankfurt. He explained everything. So here we are.
Richard laughed again, happily. He put his hands in his pockets.
And here's £20 for my big sister, and a little birthday present for my favorite girl.
Jennifer looked at him. She suddenly felt very happy about her brother.
You can keep the money,
She said.
it's not important. But I only gave it to you on Thursday night.
She said.
How?
I've got a new job.
Said Richard.
Started yesterday. And this time I'm not working for a jewelry thief.
Wendy opened her present and laughed for the first time that day.
Oh, look.
She said.
It's some gold earrings. They're lovely.
Richard laughed too.
They're only small earrings, Wendy, but I can tell you this, they did not come from Frankfurt in an egg box.
Anna and the fighter. Anna did not sleep all night. She was excited. Early in the morning, her father called her.
Come on, Anna. It's time to get up. It's a long way to the station.
Anna got dressed and she was soon ready. She did not eat any breakfast. She was nervous. She was going to visit her aunt in Nara. She was going alone in a train for the first time. Anna and her father left the village and began to walk to the station. It was a long way. They reached the station at midday. Soon the train came. It was nearly empty. Anna got in. She was frightened. It was her first journey away from home.
Your aunt will meet you at Nara.
Her father said.
Be careful now, Anna. Don't talk to any strangers.
The train started suddenly. Soon it was going fast. Anna watched her father. He looked smaller and smaller, then he disappeared. The train journey was very long. Anna looked out of the window. The fields, trees, villages, and animals rushed past. After a long time, she began to feel sleepy. She was very tired. Slowly, she fell asleep. Later, Anna woke up. It was dark outside. She felt small and lost. She was a long way from her village and her father. There was a man in the carriage with her now. He had an ugly face, and he was very big and strong. His hair was very short. He looked bad and dangerous. The man smiled at Anna.
Hello.
He said,
You're awake now, are you? Where are you going?
Anna remembered her father's words. She did not say anything.
Are you going to Polona?
Asked the man. Anna was surprised.
No, to Nara.
She said,
Nara.
said the man.
But we passed Nara 2 hours ago. You were asleep.
Anna wanted to cry. She sat very still. It was warm in the carriage, but Anna felt cold.
We've passed Nara.
She asked.
Ease, said the man.
Anna thought of the journey back to Nara. How much did it cost? She did not have any money. She thought of her aunt at Nara station.
Don't worry,
Said the man.
I will help you. What's your name?
Anna.
She said.
My name is Sam.
Said the man.
You can trust me, Anna.
Anna looked at Sam again. He was very ugly. He had a long scar on his face and he looked dangerous. But he seemed kind. Was he good or bad? Anna did not know. The train began to slow down. Sam got up and looked out of the window. Anna saw a newspaper on Sam's seat. There was a photograph on the back page. It was Sam's photograph. Above the photograph was a headline, "This man is a dangerous fighter." Now Anna was sure. Sam was a bad man, and dangerous too. He was a criminal. Anna must be careful. She must get away from him quickly. Sam left the window.
We're coming into Polona now.
He said.
Stay with me. I'll help you.
The train stopped. Anna jumped up and ran to the door. She wanted to run away. The door was very heavy. She could not open it. Sam was standing behind her.
I will open it.
He said. At the station exit, Anna was stopped.
Where is your ticket?
This ticket is for Nara. I fell asleep. I passed Nara. I haven't got any money,
I'll pay.
said voice. It was Sam.
Thank you, sir.
Come with me, Anne. Anna wanted to run away, but she was frightened of Sam. She was tired and lost. Palona was a big town. Anna did not know anybody there. Sam called a taxi.
Get in, Anna.
He said. Anna got in.
The Boxer Hotel.
Sam said to the driver. The taxi went a long way. The streets of Palona were wide and busy. There were lots of cars and shops and people. The taxi turned into a small, dark street and stopped. Sam got out and paid the taxi driver. Anna looked up and down the street.
Come on, Anna.
Said Sam. Anna could not run away. She was weak and slow. Sam was big and strong. She followed Sam into the hotel. There was a cafe inside the hotel. It did not look very clean. Two men were drinking and playing cards. They saw Sam. One of them said,
Hello, Sammy, come and have a drink. Who's the pretty girl?
Sam took off his coat and sat down.
Hello, Tino. Hello, Bubs.
He said.
This is Anna. She's lost.
The men looked at Anna and laughed.
Lost, is she?
Said Tino.
Poor Anna. You're a lucky man, Sam. Have a drink.
Sam gave Anna a chair. She sat down. She looked at the men. Tino had a mustache. Bubs did not have any front teeth. They looked tough. The men were drinking. Tino gave Anna a glass.
Come on, Anna.
He said.
Drink some wine.
Anna pushed the glass away. She thought, I mustn't eat or drink anything. These men will give me a drug. Then I will fall asleep. Sam called the waiter.
Bring some dinner.
He said.
Bring some good, hot food.
The waiter came with the food. Bubs put some of the food on a plate and gave it to Anna. It looked good and smelled delicious. Anna forgot about drugs and began to eat. She ate quickly and finished everything. She put her spoon down. The men were looking at her. They laughed. Anna was very frightened again.
Come on, Anna.
Said Sam.
You're tired. You must go to bed now.
He took her arm.
Lock her door, Sam.
Said Tino.
There are bad men in Palona. You must keep her safe.
Bubs laughed.
Good night, Anna.
He said. Sam took Anna upstairs and into a bedroom. Her heart was beating fast.
Good night, Anna.
Said Sam. He smiled at her.
Don't worry. You are safe here.
Anna did not say anything. Sam seemed kind. But she remembered the newspaper. Sam was dangerous and his friends looked dangerous too. She must escape. Sam went out of the room and shut the door. He locked it and went downstairs. Anna sat on the bed and cried. Downstairs, the men drank and played cards. Anna heard their voices. They were laughing. After a long time, she fell asleep. Anna woke late. The sun was shining. She looked out of the window. The waiter was sitting outside in the street. He was smoking a cigarette and reading a newspaper. Anna looked around the room. It was dirty. There was some old paper on the floor. In one corner, there was a small table with some things on it. Anna had an idea. There was a bureau on the table. She took the bureau and picked up a piece of paper from the floor. She wrote, "Please help me. I want to go to Nara. My aunt is waiting for me there. I must escape. I have no money and no friends. Anna." She threw the note out of the window. The waiter picked it up. He read the note. He looked up and saw her. He smiled at her and went into the hotel. Anna heard voices outside her room. Somebody unlocked the door. The waiter came in. There was somebody on the stairs behind him.
It's a policeman,
thought Anna. He's brought a policeman. She ran forward. It was Sam. He was holding her note in his hand.
Good afternoon, Anna.
Said Sam.
You've slept very late. You must be hungry. Come and have some food. We're going soon.
The waiter smiled at Sam. Anna understood. The waiter did not want to help her. He and Sam were friends. Anna went downstairs with Sam and they gave her some food, but she was not hungry. She did not eat or drink anything. Sam went outside into the street. Anna heard voices. Sam was talking to a man. What were they planning? Sam came inside again.
Come on, Anna, we must go now.
He said. A taxi was waiting outside. Anna and Sam got in.
Where are we going?
Anna asked. Sam looked at her.
I'll take you to your aunt later.
He said.
First, I have an important job to do.
Sam smiled. The smile twisted his face. He looked very ugly. Soon the taxi stopped. Sam and Anna got out. They were outside a big building. There was a notice outside. Anna understood now. Sam was a boxer. Dangerous fighter meant good boxer. Sam was not a criminal. Anna followed Sam into the building. It was a very big hall. There were seats on all sides. In the middle was the boxing ring. Tino and Bubs were waiting for them.
Stay here, Anna.
Said Sam.
Tino and Bubs will look after you. I must go now.
Tino and Bubs shook Sam's hand.
Good luck, Sam,
Said Bubs.
You went all right.
Said Tino. Anna smiled at Sam for the first time.
Good luck, Sam,
She said. Tino and Bubs took Anna to a seat beside the ring. Tino sat on one side of her and Bubs on the other. Anna sat quietly and waited. The two men talked excitedly.
Sam's going to win.
Said Tino.
of course he'll win.
Said Bubs.
He's the best fighter in the country.
Anna listened. Sam was famous.
Everybody wants him to win.
said Tino,
Everybody likes him.
That's right.
said Bubs,
Sam's a great boxer, and he's a good man too.
I know a story about Sam.
said Tino,
One night he was asleep in bed. He heard shouts in the street and he looked outside. A house was on fire. He ran outside. There was a child in the burning house. He went inside and saved the child. But he was badly hurt. His face was burned and he got a bad scar.
Poor Sam.
said Bubs.
That's why he's so ugly.
They both laughed. Anna was listening quietly. She now understood everything. She was safe with Sam. She felt sorry for him.
Is the fight going to start soon?
She asked Tino,
Yes, of course,
said Tino.
it will start very soon.
The hall was full of people now. Boys were selling cigarettes and sweets. Everybody was laughing and joking. The referee was waiting in the ring. The audience was excited now.
Sam! Sam! We want Sam!
They shouted. Sam climbed into the ring. He was wearing short trousers and big boxing gloves. He raised both hands in the air. The crowd was clapping.
Sam!
Sam,
Sam!
They shouted. The other fighter climbed into the ring. He was very big and strong,
Here comes Danny.
said Tino.
He's a very good fighter.
Anna was worried,
Don't you worry, Anna.
said Bubs.
Sam's the best fighter in the country.
The referee called the two boxers to the center of the ring. He spoke to them quietly for a few moments. Then Sam and Danny shook hands. The two fighters went back to their corners and waited. A bell rang and the fight began. Danny was younger than Sam, but he was a good fighter. He moved fast. He tried to hit Sam, but Sam jumped away every time. Sam's arms were long. He moved very quickly. He hit Danny hard, many times. Anna was very excited. Her hands held the seat tightly. It was a long fight. Sam moved quickly. He hit Danny often, but Danny did not fall down. Sam was getting tired. He was moving more slowly. Anna was worried. The crowd was shouting.
Sam! Sam!
Anna shouted.
Sam! Sam!
Come on, Sam. Watch out.
Tino and Bubs were shouting too. Danny hit Sam's face hard. Blood came out of Sam's nose and one of his eyes was nearly closed. But Sam did not stop. He ran forward and hit Danny with all his strength. Danny fell over and lay still. The referee started to count.
1, 2, 3, 4,
Danny did not move.
5, 6, 7,
Danny tried to get up. He could not.
8, 9, 10.
Danny lay still. The fight was over. Sam was the winner. Anna was laughing and clapping.
Well done, Sam! Well done, Sam!
She shouted. Nobody heard her. Everybody was shouting.
Sam. We want Sam. We want Sam.
Tino and Bubs took Anna to the dressing room. Sam was resting.
Hello, Sam.
said Anna.
You were great.
Sam was surprised.
Hello, Anna.
He said,
You're different now. You didn't talk to me before. I am sorry, Sam.
said Anna.
I was frightened.
I know.
Said Sam.
I am big and ugly, and you were frightened. But I'm not a criminal, Anna.
I am sorry, Sam.
Anna said again.
I was wrong. I'm not frightened now.
Sam was pleased.
Come on, Anna.
He said,
We'll go to Nara now.
Your aunt is waiting for you. Anna said goodbye to Tino and Bubs. She got into a taxi with Sam. It was a long way to Nara and Anna asked Sam many questions. They talked and talked and talked. They reached Nara at night. It was dark. Sam knew Nara. He quickly found Anna's aunt's house. They knocked on the door. The door! Anna's aunt was standing in the doorway. She was crying.
Oh, Anna,
She said,
thank God. You are here at last.
Then she saw Sam. He looked terrible. His face was cut and bruised after the fight.
Anna,
She said,
who is this man?
Auntie,
Anna said,
don't be angry. This is Sam. I fell asleep on the train. I passed Nara station. Sam helped me. He took me to a hotel. He brought me to Nara in a taxi.
Anna's aunt looked at Sam again.
Wait a minute.
She said. She ran inside. She came back with a newspaper. Sam's photograph was on the back page.
Are you Sam the boxer?
She asked.
Yes. I am.
Said Sam. Anna's aunt was pleased. Sam was famous. He was a great man. Everybody knew him.
Come in, Sam.
She said.
Please sit down. Will you have some tea?
Anna sat in the room with her aunt and Sam. She did not say anything. She felt very happy. Anna's aunt asked Sam many questions. She laughed a lot. She liked him. It was getting very late.
I must go now, Anna.
Said Sam.
Can I come and see you again?
Yes, Sam.
Said Anna. She smiled at him. Chapter 1, Old Meets New. What do people know about Japan? Japan is in East Asia, in the Pacific Ocean. Most people know that. Many people like sushi, and that comes from Japan. And everyone knows about Japanese sumo wrestling. But there are a lot more amazing things about this country. Japan is one of the most exciting countries in the world. It is also a country with many different faces. In Japan, East meets West, and Old meets New. Here you can find beautiful old wooden houses and big tall modern buildings in one street. You can visit ancient temples and shrines and buy the newest computer games. Japan has some of the biggest cities in the world and some of the most beautiful countryside. Japan is a country of islands. It has 4 big islands, Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, and Shikoku, and nearly 7,000 smaller ones. The country has many mountains, and there is not a lot of good land for buildings. Most Japanese people live in the big cities in the south and west of Honshu, away from the mountains. There are 128 million people in Japan, and nearly 69 million of them live near the Pacific Ocean between the capital city Tokyo and Osaka. You can find very different weather in the different islands of Japan. In the island of Hokkaido, the winters are long and cold, and the summers are warm. But in Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands in the south, it is warm in the winter and hot in the summer. So in December in Japan, you can go in the sea in the south and go skiing in the mountains in the north. Millions of people visit Japan every year. Japanese people like to help these visitors, and they are very polite to them. This is a very important thing for most Japanese people. They want to be polite to everyone. Work and the family are also very important in Japan. Most Japanese people have 2 religions, Shintoism and Buddhism. People go to temples and shrines, and there are also many Shinto and Buddhist festivals in the year. Some of Japan's industries make a lot of money. Japan makes about 10 million cars every year, and its electronics industry, cameras, computers, phones, and televisions is famous around the world. Japan is always changing. It often makes or does new things first, and countries in the West often change things to be like Japan. But Japan does not forget its past. In the countryside, many Japanese work as farmers. They grow rice and catch fish, like people hundreds of years ago. Many people come to Japan for business. But many also come to see the country's beautiful art temples and gardens. They go to the theater and eat well in Japan's many wonderful restaurants. Japan has something for everyone. Its cities are new and exciting, but this amazing country has ancient buildings and culture too. Chapter 2: Emperors, Samurai, and Shoguns. Many of the important things about life in Japan today were also important more than 1,500 years ago. Japan is near to Korea and China, and many ideas came to ancient Japan from people in these countries. Like Korean and Chinese people, the ancient Japanese learned to grow rice and to make cloth. Buddhism came to Japan from Korea and China, and by the 400s, the Japanese began to use Chinese kanji, or picture words, for writing. From the 600s, emperors ruled Japan. Families came together into groups called clans around these important rulers. The clans fought for power all the time. In 794, the Japanese emperor moved his home to Kyoto. This was a quiet time in Japan, and art and writing became very important. In the early 1000s in Kyoto, a woman called Morisaki Shikibu wrote the tale of Genji, and people read this interesting book even now. At this time, fighters became very powerful in Japan. At first they worked for important men in different parts of the country. When the fighters were there, the land and homes of these men were safe. But the very best fighters now made new clans, called samurai. The samurai were very powerful. The most powerful of the samurai were called shoguns, and these shoguns wanted to rule Japan. In 1185, the emperor lost power, and Minamoto no Yoritomo became the first shogun ruler of Japan. For the next 700 years, different shoguns ruled Japan, and again the clans fought. In 1600, the shoguns of the Tokugawa clan came to power. The first of these, Tokugawa Ieyasu, made his home at Edo, now Tokyo. Now they were in power, the Tokugawa shoguns wanted to stay there. They made a class system. They gave everyone a place, from the shoguns and samurai at the top down to farmers and workers. Under the Tokugawa, Edo became bigger and more important, and there was a lot of art and theater. But in 1639, the Tokugawa closed Japan to the world. For 200 years, people from other countries could not come in and out of Japan, and Japanese people could not leave. This stopped in 1853 when American ships came to Japan. They wanted to buy Japanese goods and to bring American goods into Japan. The Tokugawa shoguns now lost their power, and from 1868 the emperors again ruled Japan. After this, Japan began to change. The emperor broke down the class system of the Tokugawa shoguns. School became a part of life for all Japanese children. Japan began to make things and sell them to other countries, and people came to Japan to do business. Toyoda Sakichi was a very important person in Japan at this time. First he changed things in the cloth industry, and after that people could work better and faster. Later his business began to make cars too, and the Toyota Motor Corporation was born. Japan fought in the First World War, 1914-18, and by the 1920s it was an important country in the world. In the Second World War, 1939-45, Japan fought in the Pacific. In August 1945, as atomic bombs killed more than 200,000 Japanese in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Bombs destroyed many of Japan's cities and industries in the war. But because Japanese people worked hard and had good ideas, Japan's industries began to grow. At first, Japan made cars, ships, and steel, but in the 1970s, the electronics industry became more important. Japan began to make phones, televisions, computers, and cameras. Soon Japan was famous around the world for its new ideas in the electronics industry. Then, from the 1990s, industries in other countries in Asia began to grow, and there were hard times for Japan. But Japan is the country of Canon, Toyota, Mitsubishi, and Sony, and we see names like these every day on things in our homes, schools, and places of work. Chapter 3: Earthquakes and Volcanoes. On the 11th of March 2011, there was a big earthquake east of the city of Sendai in the northeast of Japan. Then a tsunami, 40 meters high, came onto the land and destroyed everything in front of it. More than 18,000 people died, and many more lost their homes. This was not Japan's first big earthquake. In 1995, the Great Hanshin earthquake killed more than 6,000 people in and near the city of Kobe, and destroyed more than 100,000 buildings. And in 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake destroyed a lot of Tokyo. But new buildings and roads in Japan are better now. They move a lot in an earthquake, so the earthquake does not destroy them. Because of this, in March 2011, many buildings stayed standing in the earthquake, but the tsunami brought them down. There are about 1,500 earthquakes a year in Japan, but most of them are small. So why does Japan have so many earthquakes? In this part of the world, under the Pacific Ocean, the land is always moving. Because of this, there are often earthquakes, and many of Japan's mountains are volcanoes. About 15 times a year, people near a volcano in different parts of Japan see smoke and hear noise from the mountain. The most famous volcano is Mount Fuji, the highest mountain in the country at 3,776 meters. Mount Fuji is very beautiful and many people visit it. Because of Japan's many volcanoes, it also has more than 2,000 hot springs. Many people come to the springs to keep well or just because they like the warm water. People in Japan must be careful about volcanoes and earthquakes, but sometimes they must keep safe in typhoons too. Typhoons come from the Pacific. They bring very bad weather with powerful winds. They usually come to Japan between July and October. Typhoons destroy buildings and roads. Hills sometimes break away in the rain, and often people die. When there is a big typhoon or an earthquake, Japanese people move quickly. In a typhoon, they stay in their buildings and move away from windows. In an earthquake, they move under a table and stay safe there. Chapter 4: Life in Japan. Most Japanese people live in cities. But others live in the suburbs, places near a big city, and go to and from work every day. Their working day is usually very long, and often they live far away from their work. There are many people and cars in Japanese cities, and sometimes there is bad air pollution. There are lots of buses and trains in Japan, and they are usually very good. Trains carry thousands of people under the big cities. Other trains, called Shinkansen, go across the country. Shinkansen are some of the best trains in the world. They can go at 300 kilometers per hour, and they are nearly always on time. What are Japanese homes like? Old Japanese houses were wooden and had paper doors. On the floors, they had mats called tatami. They had Japanese beds called futons. People usually put these away in the day because their homes were not very big. Most new houses in Japan are wooden, but many people live in apartments in big buildings. They often have beds, not futons, because their homes are bigger, but many still have some tatami mats. In Japanese homes there are often Buddhist or Shinto altars, and families come to these small places to pray. There are many Buddhist temples in Japan, and also thousands of Shinto shrines. People go there to pray at festivals and at important times, for example when a child is born. Like their families, children work very hard. Children must go to school from 6 years old, but many children begin school at only 3 or 4. Children go to elementary school for 6 years, and then they move to junior high school and high school. Many children go to classes in things like English and music after their day at school. Children can leave school when they are 15, but more than 90% of children stay at school. After that, many young Japanese people become students for some years. Then they need to find work. In the cities, many people work in business and for the big industries, steel, ships, cars, and electronics. In the countryside, people often live on small family farms, growing things like rice, tea, and apples. Fishing is an important industry in Japan too. People get fish from the sea or have fish farms. Japanese people work very hard, but family life is very important to them too. Most Japanese families eat together at home, and some people go to live with their sons' or daughters' family when they get old. Old people are very important in Japan, and people are usually polite to them. At weekends, families often go out together or watch television or play computer games at home. Chapter 5: Language and Customs. Most people can learn a little Japanese, and Japanese people like it when visitors speak their language. But to speak Japanese well, that is not easy. There are 3 kinds of writing in Japanese. In kanji, pictures make words, but in hiragana and katakana there is a letter for every sound. You use hiragana for Japanese words and katakana for words from other languages like English. You can learn hiragana and katakana quickly and say the words easily. But that is not everything. In Japanese, you use different words for older and younger people and for important people. Men and women use different words too. And people speak Japanese differently in different parts of the country. So you need to learn a lot of different things. There are other things to learn about life in Japan. For example, never wash in the bath in Japan. Japanese people always wash outside the bath first, so the dirty water stays out of the bath. Then they get into the bath. You must be careful about shoes in Japan too. Japanese people do not wear their shoes in the house. They leave their shoes at the door, so the floor or the tatami mats do not get dirty. Sometimes Japanese people wear wooden shoes called geta. You can get these shoes on and off easily when you need to. Saying hello to people in Japan is different too. Japanese people bow when they meet people, and they give a bigger bow for older or more important people. When you talk to or about someone, you must always put san or sama after their name. Japan has many old customs, and one of the most important is the tea ceremony. Tea came to Japan from China in the 700s. At a tea ceremony, everyone first meets the other people at the ceremony and then walks in the garden of the tea house. In a small room, the tea maker then makes green tea very carefully and everyone watches. Now the visitors bow, drink their tea, and eat. At a tea ceremony, everyone must live now. You must watch the tea and the tea maker and not think about other things. Many visitors like to go to a tea ceremony, and many also like to see Japan's famous cherry blossom. There are many cherry trees in Japan, and in April they always have lots of beautiful blossom. At this time, lots of people go out to sit and eat under the trees, in the day and at night, and look at the blossom. There are cherry blossom festivals too. These cherry blossom festivals are some of many festivals in Japan at different times in the year. Festivals are very important for Japanese people. The most important festival is New Year's Day, when families often visit temples and shrines. Many people eat noodles on the day before New Year's Day because they want to live for a long time. Does this help? Well, perhaps. In November, for one of these festivals, families take 3, 5, and 7-year-old children to shrines, and you can see many children in beautiful clothes. At the shrines, families say thank you for their children and pray for them. One of the biggest and most famous festivals in Tokyo is the Kanda Matsuri in May. For this festival, people wear clothes from old times and carry 100 small shrines through the streets of Tokyo. Japanese people and visitors love watching this very happy festival. For festivals and for other important days, many people in Japan wear wonderful clothes called kimonos. New kimonos are very expensive but beautiful, and people often keep them in their families for many years. Women wear kimonos, carry fans, and wear beautiful combs in their hair. Some women, called geisha, wear kimonos to work. The first geisha began to work in Japan about 300 years ago, and you can find them in some cities today. Geisha learn Japanese arts like music and singing. They wear wonderful kimonos and do their hair with beautiful combs. Their faces are very white and their mouths are red. Chapter 6: Sport and Culture. What other things do Japanese people like to do at the weekends? Sport is very important in Japan, of course. Many Japanese like to watch and play baseball, and thousands of people go to see famous teams like the Yomiuri Giants and the Yakult Swallows. Many Japanese began to play football after the 2002 FIFA World Cup in Japan and Korea, and in 2011, the Japanese women's football team came home from Germany with the World Cup. So Homer, the best player in the team, was the 2011 FIFA Best Player of the Year. Many people in Japan like to watch sumo wrestling. It began in Japan nearly 2,000 years ago. In wrestling, two men fight in a ring. They wear only a kind of cloth called a mawashi, and they wear their hair like an ancient samurai. One wrestler must get the other out of the ring or down to the floor. The best wrestlers are very famous in Japan, but they work very hard. Young wrestlers go into a heya, or wrestling club, when they are only about 15 years old. There they must work for the older wrestlers and learn to fight, and they do not usually go home or see their families for years. Many Japanese children learn sports like judo and kendo in schools and clubs, and skiing, mountain walking, and running are also important sports in Japan. Many people in Japan like to go to the theater in the evenings or at weekends. There are different kinds of Japanese theater. No theater is the oldest kind. There are no women, and usually there are only one or two men, and there is music and singing. In kabuki theater you see a lot of men with amazing clothes in many colors. Bunraku is a kind of puppet theater. The puppets are often 1 meter high or more, and 3 people in black clothes work together to move each puppet. Chikamatsu Munzaemon is one of Japan's most famous writers for theater. He wrote about 100 stories for the Bunraku theater, and you can see many in Japan today. Many kinds of music are important in Japanese culture. One interesting kind of music from old times is gagaku. You can hear gagaku today at some Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples. And of course many Japanese people like pop music too. Art and crafts are important in Japanese life. Some of these first came to Japan in ancient times: calligraphy, a kind of beautiful writing, akabana, working with flowers, and bonsai, small and beautiful trees. In the early 1800s, people began to make and sell ukiyo-e pictures of geisha, the theater, or beautiful things like cherry blossom. One of the most famous names from this time is Hokusai. He made pictures of the countryside of Japan and the Great Wave. One of his pictures from the 1830s is famous around the world. Japan is now known for its modern art too, and in many of its crafts people can see the arts of old Japan with new ideas from the West. There is art in everything in Japan. Japanese food is not only very good to eat, it is also beautiful to look at. Japanese gardens, too, are works of art. They change a lot at different times of the year. What about modern culture in Japan? Karaoke is important, of course, and many people go out to sing karaoke with friends or do karaoke at home. Manga and anime are also a very big part of modern Japanese culture. In manga, pictures tell a story in a book. In anime, pictures tell a story in a film. Young and old people read manga. There are manga for everything from baseball to love stories. You can buy manga at many shops, and Japan now has manga cafes. In these places you can have a drink, read manga, and watch TV or anime. Millions of people like anime too. Films like Akira and Spirited Away are famous in Japan and in many other countries. Chapter 7, Tokyo. Most visitors to Japan go to Tokyo, of course. Tokyo is the capital and most important city of Japan, and it is an amazing place. More than 35 million people live here, but it is very safe and you can get around easily by bus or train. People and cars make lots of noise in Tokyo. But here you can also find quiet places, ancient temples, beautiful gardens, and old wooden houses. One of the most interesting parts of Tokyo is Shinjuku. Here there are big department stores, modern shops with many different kinds of goods. There are amazing buildings hundreds of meters high, restaurants, cinemas, art galleries, and one of Tokyo's biggest gardens too. Shinjuku has something of everything. People go to West Shinjuku to work, and they go to East Shinjuku to play. More than 250,000 people work in the tall buildings of West Shinjuku. One of these is the famous Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building TMGB by Kenzo Tange. Tange was famous for many wonderful buildings in Japan and around the world. Many of his buildings, like the TMGB, feel old and Japanese but new and exciting too. In East Shinjuku, you can eat, shop, and go to the cinema. You can also walk in the beautiful gardens at Shinjuku Joyan. Near Shinjuku is Meiji Jingu, the most important Shinto shrine in Tokyo. The shrine was made in the 1920s to remember Emperor Meiji and his wife, and there is a beautiful garden there. The emperor's wife loved to visit it and see the flowers. At New Year, more than 3 million people come to Meiji Jingu to pray. A very important place for the Buddhist religion in Tokyo is the famous Senso-ji temple at Asakusa. There are always a lot of people at the temple, and you can feel the amazing past of this ancient place. The imperial palace is very old too. The emperor and his family live in the palace now, but in 1593, Tokugawa Ieyasu, the first of the Tokugawa shoguns, began to make a castle here. It soon became the world's biggest castle. On the 23rd of December into January, the gardens nearest to the palace are open, and thousands of people go to see the emperor and his family. On other days, you can walk in the beautiful East Gardens. There are beautiful gardens in Ueno Park too, and here you can also see temples, shrines, and the famous Tokyo National Museum. The museum has some amazing Japanese art and also ancient things from Japan and other places in Asia. Many people go to Shibuya and Ginza for their shops. In Ginza, you can find big department stores and also very small craft shops. Some people wear their best clothes in Ginza because it is a very expensive part of Tokyo. Go to the Matria department store and look at the beautiful kimonos there. Or go into the Sony building. There you can see the newest cameras, phones, and electronics. In Shibuya, modern Tokyo hits you in the face. Here you can shop for the newest clothes and music, and in the evening, Tokyo's young people come to the many restaurants and clubs. You can visit many other places in Tokyo. Go to Akihabara to buy cheap electronics or manga. Visit the Tsukiji fish market. People from restaurants and food shops come here and buy the best fish in Japan. Go up the new Tokyo Sky Tree, the tallest building in Japan at 634 meters. visit the art galleries at Roppongi, or more of Tokyo's many museums. And of course, have wonderful food. There is something for every visitor in this amazing city. Chapter 8: Other Places to Visit. For many people, Kyoto is one of the most important cities to visit in Japan. Kyoto was the capital of Japan for more than 1,000 years. Today, Kyoto has big department stores with everything for modern life in Japan. But it is an ancient city too, with mountains around it. And on the many walks around Kyoto you can see old wooden houses, beautiful temples and palaces, and wonderful gardens. In Kyoto, visit the beautiful Kinkakuji Temple on the lake. Walk around Higashima too. Here you can see the famous Kiyamizu Temple and many other temples, gardens and museums. In Gion, people in wonderful geisha clothes walk in the streets. Some of the most important people in Japan come to Gion to eat in the restaurants or visit the old wooden tea houses. An important visit for many people is to the Peace Memorial Park and Museum at Hiroshima. Here you can learn about the atomic bombs of 1945 and see the bomb dome. This is one of the only buildings in Hiroshima from the time of the atomic bomb. Between Tokyo and Hiroshima is Osaka, one of Japan's biggest cities after Tokyo. Osaka is famous for its food and also for its nightlife. Here you can find music and theater, but also art galleries and some amazing new buildings. The Umeda Sky Building is 173 meters high, and the Floating Garden Observatory goes between two parts of it. You can see all of Osaka from there. From Osaka, it is not far to Hainjijo, the best of Japan's old castles. The castle became famous at the time of the Tokugawa shoguns and is a true samurai castle. And Nara is also near Osaka. Nara was the old capital of Japan before Kyoto, and it has many Buddhist temples. Here, in the hills, is Todaiji Temple, the biggest wooden building in the world. But Japan is not just a place of exciting cities and ancient culture. You can get away from it all in Okinawa, in the far south of Japan. Here it is warm all year. There are 160 islands in Okinawa, and in the beautiful water of the Pacific you can see amazing fish and sea animals. Okinawa is also famous for its old castles, friendly people, good food, and beautiful crafts. Do you like walking in the mountains and the countryside? Then you must visit Hokkaido, the big island in the north of Japan. The countryside here is beautiful, and there are many wonderful animals and flowers. In the winter, you can go skiing in Hokkaido, and in the capital Sapporo, there is a snow festival every year. From Tokyo it is not far to Hakone, a beautiful town with lakes, mountains, and hot springs. Here you can see beautiful Mount Fuji, look at some wonderful art in the Polen Museum, or visit Lake Ashinako. Hakone is next to an old volcano. You can smell the hot air, and there are lots of hot springs. In the summer, in July and August, many people go up Mount Fuji. They take the bus first, and then walk for 5 or 6 hours to the top of the mountain. It is a hard walk, but it is beautiful at the top. Chapter 9: Japanese Food. One of the most wonderful things about a visit to Japan is the amazing food. There are many restaurants in Japan, and every town or place has different kinds of food. Different times of year bring new foods to the table too. Japanese food is always good, and it often looks beautiful. Japanese people make their food very carefully. There are many different kinds of restaurant in Japan. You can eat at a cheap noodle shop or have a drink with some food at an izakaya. Many restaurants are not very expensive, and you can look at the food in the windows before you eat. But for the very best food in a beautiful place, people go to Ryodi. These restaurants have gardens and beautiful rooms, but sometimes only people known to the Ryodi can get tables. Many Japanese restaurants have just one important kind of food. For example, here are restaurants for tempura, fish, and vegetables in batter. In Kaiten sushi shops there is sashimi fish and sushi cold rice with fish or vegetables on a moving table. When you see something nice, you take it. Fish, vegetables, and noodles are all very important in Japanese food, but rice is the most important thing. There is always miso soup too. Often there is just a little of everything, but it all looks beautiful. People eat rice, miso soup, and fish or vegetables for breakfast. People at work, at school, or going on a train do not usually take sandwiches, they take a bento box. A bento box has different kinds of food, always with rice, in a box, and you can find these in many shops. Green tea is an important drink in Japan. Most people like to drink coffee too, and there are lots of coffee shops in Japan. Then there is sake. This is made from rice, and you can drink it warm in winter. People drink beer too, and you can get very good Japanese whiskey. In many Japanese restaurants, you sit on the floor, on tatami mats. Before you eat, the people in the restaurant give you a hot or a cold cloth for your hands. Then the food arrives. You eat Japanese food with wooden sticks called chopsticks. Here are some things to remember. Do not stand your chopsticks in your rice. This is not polite in Japan. Do not eat some things but leave others. Eat all your food. Before you eat, say itadakimasu, and when you finish, you can say goshiso sama deshita. That was very good. In Japan, that is nearly always true. Chapter 10, Into the Future. Some things in Japan are changing all the time, and others are no different from hundreds of years ago. So what is Japan's future? One big change coming for Japan is in its people. The number of people in Japan is getting smaller because people are having smaller families. Women are working for longer and having children later. There are also many more old people in Japan today. More than 20% of Japanese people are older than 65 because people now live much longer. In the past in Japan, women always helped the old people in their family, but many more women work now. So who is going to help these old people, and where is the money going to come from? These are big questions for Japan today. But perhaps the old people have the answer. Because they eat well and have good doctors and hospitals, old Japanese people often stay well for a very long time. So perhaps working longer, into their 70s or 80s, is the future for old people. Japan's industries are changing too. In the 1990s, countries like China and Korea began to make electronic goods very cheaply. Many countries got their electronic goods from these countries, not from Japan. So now, Japan does not make many of these goods. Japan makes more one-of-a-kind goods, for example, the very best cameras and amazing computer games. Japan also has half of the world's robots. Robots are becoming more and more important in the modern world, and again, Japan is in front here. With more and more cars in Japan, many cities have bad air pollution. Japan is working with other countries around the world to fight air pollution. Japan's car industry is working hard on this. Some of their new small cars use electricity, and Japanese people are thinking of other ideas for the future. There is also the question of nuclear power. Before 2011, about 25% of Japan's electricity came from nuclear power. Japan wanted to have more nuclear power stations. But the earthquake and tsunami of 2011 destroyed part of a nuclear power station near Sendai, so it was not safe. More than 80,000 people had to leave their homes. Now many people are afraid of nuclear power. So how is Japan going to make its electricity in the future? Like many other countries, Japan is now looking at things like the sun and the wind to do this. Japan, of course, has many exciting new ideas. The people of this amazing country, with their wonderful ancient culture, are so often the first to take the world into the future.
Chapter 1, Mystery Girl. It all began on a beautiful spring morning in a village called Whistler, in Canada, a pretty little village in the mountains of British Columbia. There was a cafe in the village, with tables outside, and at one of these tables sat a young man. He finished his breakfast, drank his coffee, looked up into the blue sky, and felt the warm sun on his face. Nick Lortz was a happy man. The waiter came up to his table.
More coffee?
He asked.
Yeah, great,
said Nick. He gave the waiter his coffee cup. The waiter looked at the camera on the table.
On vacation?
He said.
Where are you from?
San Francisco.
Nick said. He laughed.
But I'm not on vacation, I'm working. I'm a travel writer, and I'm doing a book on mountains in North America. I've got some great pictures of your mountain.
The two men looked up at Whistler Mountain behind the village. It looked very beautiful in the morning sun.
Do you travel a lot, then?
Asked the waiter.
All the time.
Nick said.
I write books, and I write for travel magazines. I write about everything, different countries, towns, villages, rivers, mountains, people.
The waiter looked over Nick's head.
There's a girl across the street.
He said.
Do you know her?
Nick turned his head and looked.
No, I don't.
Well, she knows you, I think.
The waiter said.
She's watching you very carefully.
He gave Nick a smile.
Have a nice day.
He went away, back into the cafe. Nick looked at the girl across the street. She was about 25, and she was very pretty.
She is watching me,
Nick thought. Then the girl turned and looked in one of the shop windows. After a second or two, she looked back at Nick again. Nick watched her.
She looks worried,
he thought.
What's she doing? Is she waiting for somebody?
Suddenly, the girl smiled. Then she walked across the street, came up to Nick's table, and sat down. She put her bag down on the table. The bag was half open.
Hi. I'm Jan.
She said.
Do you remember me? We met at a party in Toronto.
Hi, Jan,
said Nick. He smiled.
I'm Nick. But we didn't meet at a party in Toronto. I don't go to parties very often, and never in Toronto.
Oh,
the girl said. But she didn't get up or move away.
Have some coffee,
said Nick. The story about the party in Toronto wasn't true, but it was a beautiful morning, and she was a pretty girl.
Maybe it was a party in Montreal. Or New York.
The girl laughed.
Okay. Maybe it was. And yes, I'd love some coffee.
When she had her coffee, Nick asked,
What are you doing in Whistler? Or do you live here?
Oh no.
She said.
I'm just traveling through. And what are you doing here?
I'm a travel writer.
Nick said.
And I'm writing a book about famous mountains.
That's interesting.
She said. But her face was worried, not interested, and she looked across the road again. A man with very short, white hair walked across the road. He was about 60 years old, and he was tall and thin. The girl watched him.
Are you waiting for someone?
Asked Nick.
No.
She said quickly. Then she asked,
Where are you going next, Nick?
To Vancouver for 3 or 4 days.
He said.
When are you going?
She asked.
Later this morning.
He said. There was a letter in the top of the girl's half-open bag. Nick could see some of the writing, and he read it because he saw the word Vancouver, and we can meet at the Empress Hotel, Victoria, Vancouver Island, on Friday afternoon.
So she's going to Vancouver too,
he thought. Suddenly the girl said,
Do you like movies?
Movies? Yes, I love movies.
He said.
Why?
I know a man, and he loves movies and going to the cinema.
She said slowly.
People call him Mr. Hollywood.
She smiled at Nick.
Can I call you Mr. Hollywood too?
Nick laughed.
Okay,
he said.
And what can I call you?
She smiled again.
Call me Mystery Girl.
She said.
That's a good name for you,
said Nick. Just then, the man with white hair came into the cafe. He did not look at Nick or the girl, but he sat at a table near them. He asked the waiter for some breakfast. Then he began to read a magazine. The girl looked at the man, then quickly looked away again.
Do you know him?
Nick asked her.
No.
She said. She finished her coffee quickly and got up.
I must go now,
she said. Nick stood up too.
Nice too,
he began. But the girl suddenly took his face between her hands and kissed him on the mouth.
Drive carefully, Mr. Hollywood. Goodbye,
she said, with a big, beautiful smile. Then she turned and walked quickly away. Nick sat down again and watched her. She walked down the road and into a big hotel.
Now what?
Thought Nick.
Was that all about?
The man with white hair watched Nick and waited. After 4 or 5 minutes, Nick finished his coffee, took his books and his camera, and left the cafe. His car was just outside the girl's hotel, and he walked slowly along the street to it. The man with white hair waited a second, then quickly followed Nick. From a window high up in the hotel, the girl looked down into the road. She saw Nick, and the man with white hair about 50 yards behind him. Nick got into his car, and the man with white hair walked quickly to a red car across the street. 5 seconds later, Nick drove away in his blue car, and the red car began to follow him. When the girl saw this, she smiled, then went to put some things in her travel bag. Chapter 2. A Hand in the Back. That evening, in his hotel room in Vancouver, Nick could not stop thinking about the girl in the Whistler Cafe. Why did she come and sit with him? She didn't know him, and that story about a party in Toronto wasn't true. And she was worried about something. But what? And that kiss. It was nice, of course, but why did she do it?
Maybe she liked my face.
Nick thought.
Or my brown eyes. But I'm not going to see her again, so it doesn't matter, forget it.
He put some money in his pocket and went downstairs to the hotel restaurant. But there were no free tables, so he walked down to Gastown and found a restaurant there. After dinner, he went for a walk. Vancouver was a friendly city, and Nick liked walking through Gastown and Chinatown, looking in the shops and watching the people. It was nearly dark now, and it was a busy time of the evening. There were a lot of cars and a lot of people. After a time, Nick began to walk back to his hotel. He came to a busy street and waited, with a small crowd of people, to go across. A tall woman in a blue dress stood next to him. She turned and smiled at him.
It's the first warm evening of spring.
She said,
It's nice to be out after the long cold winter.
Yay,
said Nick.
it's great. It's.
Suddenly, there was a hand in his back, and the hand pushed Nick into the road. Nick fell on his face in front of a big green car. People screamed, but the green car stopped only inches from Nick's head. The woman in the blue dress ran into the road and pulled Nick to his feet.
Are you okay? What happened?
She said. The driver of the green car shouted angrily at Nick, but Nick did not hear him.
Somebody pushed me.
He said to the woman.
I didn't fall, somebody pushed me.
Pushed you?
Said the woman.
Who? I didn't see anybody.
Nick looked at the faces of the people near him, but he didn't know them. Then he saw a man's back. The man was tall and thin, and had very short white hair. He walked quickly away down the street, and did not look back.
Hey, you.
Nick shouted.
Wait.
But the man did not stop, and he was soon lost in the crowds.
Did he push you?
Asked the woman in the blue dress.
I don't know.
Nick said.
Do you know him?
She asked.
I don't know his name.
Nick said.
But I know that short white hair. Now where did I see it before?
The woman began to move away.
I must get home.
She said.
Are you okay now?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Nick said.
And thanks. Thanks for your help.
That's okay.
The woman smiled.
Be careful now.
Back in his hotel, Nick sat on his bed and thought.
It was an accident. Nobody pushed me, it was an accident. Nobody wants to kill me. And there are hundreds of men in Vancouver with white hair.
It was 1 o'clock in the morning, but Nick couldn't sleep. He listened to the cars in the road, and he looked at the night sky through his hotel room window. Then he sat at the table and tried to write some more of his book about mountains, but he couldn't think about his work. He got back into bed. There were 4 or 5 magazines in the hotel room. They were not very interesting, but Nick sat in bed and opened one, and saw a photo of Mystery Girl. He looked at the picture very carefully. But yes, it was her. Jan, the girl from the Whistler Cafe. She was next to a man of about 50 or 55, and they were in the garden of a big expensive house. They smiled at the camera, and they looked very happy. Canadian millionaire Howard Hudson and his daughter, Meg, it said under the picture, at their home in Toronto. Meg Hudson. Not Jan. Not Mystery Girl. Meg Hudson, the daughter of a millionaire. Nick read it again.
Why did she come and sit with me in the cafe at Whistler?
He thought.
Millionaires' daughters don't sit with strangers in cafes and then give them a big kiss when they leave. Why did she do it? What did she want?
He thought back to the cafe in Whistler and the girl next to him at the table. Then he remembered something. He remembered a man at a table near them in the cafe. A tall, thin man, about 60 years old. A man with very short white hair. Nick didn't sleep much that night. Chapter 3. A Walk in the Park. The next day was Thursday. Nick stayed in his hotel room and wrote about mountains all morning. Then he drove to Stanley Park in the afternoon. He sat and read a book for an hour. Then he went for a walk under the tall trees. There was nobody here. It was quiet, and he could walk and think. He thought about Meg Hudson, and about the man with white hair. Did he know Meg Hudson? Did she know him? He remembered Meg Hudson's last words. "Drive carefully, Mr. Hollywood." Why did she say that? Why did she call him Mr. Hollywood? He didn't understand any of it. Suddenly, he heard a noise. He stopped.
That was a gun.
He thought.
There's somebody in the trees with a gun.
There it is again. Then something hit the tree over his head.
Somebody's shooting at me.
Nick thought. He turned and ran, and somebody began to run after him. Nick ran through the trees. There was no sun in here, and it was half dark. And there were no people. Nobody to help him.
I must get to my care.
Nick thought.
Find some people. The police.
He ran on. He could still hear the gunman behind him, so he ran faster. After 3 or 4 minutes, he stopped and listened. Nothing. It was all quiet. Nick was afraid.
What's happening?
He thought.
Why is somebody shooting at me?
First a hand pushes me in front of a car, and now somebody's shooting at me. He waited another second or two, then walked quickly back to his car. He was very careful. He looked and listened all the time. But nobody came out of the trees, and nobody shot at him. Then he saw people, women with young children, some boys with a football, 2 men with a dog. He began to feel better.
Nobody can shoot me now.
He thought.
Not with all these people here.
10 minutes later, he was back at his car. There was a letter on the window. Nick read it. It said,
"I'm going to kill you, Mr. Hollywood."
Nick drove to the nearest police station. He waited for half an hour. Then a tired young policeman took him into a small room. Nick told his story, and the policeman wrote it all down.
So what are you going to do?
Asked Nick.
Nothing,
Said the policeman.
Nothing.
Said Nick.
But somebody shot at me, and...
Mr. Lords,
The policeman said tiredly.
how many people are there in this town with guns?
I don't know.
Said Nick.
But...
You didn't see the gunman. Was it a man, a boy, a woman? Color of eyes? Long hair, short hair? You don't know because you didn't see anybody. Maybe it was an old girlfriend. Maybe somebody doesn't like your travel books, Mr. Lords.
But what about the man with white hair in Whistler?
Said Nick.
The girl, Meg Hudson, called me Mr. Hollywood in the cafe, and this man heard her. And now I get a letter to Mr. Hollywood on my car. Who is this Mr. Hollywood?
We all want answers to our questions, Mr. Lords.
The policeman said.
But we don't always get them questions. But no answers.
Nick walked out of the police station and drove to his hotel. He was angry and afraid.
How did the man with white hair find me in Vancouver?
He thought.
Did he follow me from Whistler? Is he following me now? Maybe he's staying at my hotel too. In the next room. With his gun.
Chapter 4. The Man with White Hair. Nick stopped his car in front of the hotel. He looked carefully before he got out, but there was nobody with white hair near the hotel. He half ran through the hotel doors and went to the desk inside.
I'm looking for a man with very short white hair.
He said to the woman behind the desk.
He's staying here, I think. He's about 60 years old, and he's tall and thin.
The woman did not look very interested.
There are a lot of visitors in the hotel,
she said.
Do you know his name?
No, I don't.
Nick said.
He arrived in Vancouver yesterday, and I must find him. It's very important. Please help me.
The woman looked at him.
There are 350 rooms in this hotel,
she said.
And maybe 30 or 40 men with white hair. How can I remember all their names?
She turned away to answer a telephone call. Nick walked away from the desk.
A drink,
he thought.
I need a drink.
He went into the hotel bar, got a drink and sat down at a table.
So what do I do now?
He thought. And then he remembered something. A letter in the girl's half-open bag in the Whistler Cafe. And we can meet at the Empress Hotel, Victoria, Vancouver Island, on Friday afternoon. And tomorrow was Friday.
I'm going to Victoria, on Vancouver Island,
he thought.
To the Empress Hotel.
Nick had dinner in the hotel that evening. He finished eating and got up from his table and saw the man with white hair. Nick moved quickly. The man was at the hotel desk. Nick could see the white head above the other heads near the desk.
Excuse me,
said Nick. He pushed past the people in the hotel restaurant. A small boy ran in front of him, and Nick ran into him. The boy and Nick fell down on the floor. The boy began to cry.
Hey,
said a woman behind Nick.
I'm very sorry,
said Nick. He got up and helped the boy to his feet.
Are you okay?
He asked the boy.
be more careful next time,
said the woman. Nick moved away quickly, but when he looked back at the hotel desk, he couldn't see the man with white hair. He pushed through the crowd of people.
That man,
he shouted at the woman behind the desk.
That man with short white hair. Where did he go?
The woman looked at Nick.
Mr. Vickers?
She said.
I don't know. Vickers? Is that his name?
Said Nick.
What's his room number?
I'm sorry, I can't tell you that,
The woman said.
But I need to,
began Nick. The woman turned away to answer the telephone. After a second or two, Nick went upstairs to his room.
Vickers,
he thought.
Does Meg Hudson know Mr. Vickers? I need some answers, and I need them quickly.
Chapter 5, Vancouver Island. Tsawwassen was about 23 miles south of Vancouver. Nick drove there in his car the next morning for the 1 o'clock ferry to Vancouver Island. Every 5 minutes, he looked behind him. The road was busy, black cars, white cars, red cars, green cars. Maybe Vickers was in one of them. At Tsawwassen, Nick drove his car onto the ferry. There were a lot of cars and crowds of people. Nick got out of his car and walked up and down the ship. He looked for a man with white hair, but he didn't see one. Soon the ferry began to move and Nick felt better. He found the ferry restaurant and got something to eat. More people came in. Nick looked at the faces of all the older men. Some had hats on, so he looked for somebody tall and thin, but there was nobody.
Maybe he's not on the ferry,
Nick thought.
Maybe he's back in Vancouver.
Later, Nick walked around the ship again. Once, he thought he saw the man with white hair in the crowds, but he could not be sure. 90 minutes after leaving Tsawwassen, the ferry arrived at Swartz Bay on Vancouver Island, and Nick went back down to his car. Swartz Bay was 20 miles north of Victoria. Nick drove quickly, and again, looked behind him every 4 or 5 minutes. Once, he saw a red car about 200 yards behind him.
Did I see that car on the road from Vancouver to Tsawwassen?
He thought. He drove more slowly, but the red car still stayed 200 yards behind him, and Nick couldn't see the driver's face or hair. Soon he was in the busy streets of Victoria, and Nick didn't see the red car behind him again. Victoria was a city of gardens and beautiful old buildings. Nick liked Victoria very much, but today he wasn't interested in gardens or buildings. He found the Empress Hotel, went inside and walked across to the desk.
Can I help you?
A young man asked Nick.
I'm meeting a friend here this afternoon,
Said Nick.
Miss Hudson.
Hudson?
Said the young man.
Wait a minute.
He went away and came back.
Sorry, but there's no Miss Hudson staying here.
Nick took something from his pocket. It was the photograph of Meg and her father from the magazine.
This is her,
He said. The young man looked at the picture.
Oh, right. You mean Howard Hudson's daughter?
He said.
She's not staying here, but I saw her 10 or 15 minutes ago. She was with somebody, a man. He asked me about the tea room.
The tea room?
Said Nick.
Where's that?
The man with short white hair was tired. He couldn't sleep and he couldn't eat. He thought about only one thing, all the time. He drove and he watched, and he waited and he followed. When he drove into Victoria, the streets were busy, and suddenly he lost the blue car in front of him. Angrily, he drove around the city, past all the big hotels.
I must find him.
He said.
I must do it. Today.
Then he saw the Empress Hotel, and in the street outside it, a blue car. He drove past the hotel, left his car, and ran back down the street. He went across the road and walked past the downstairs windows. There was a big room with tables and chairs, and a lot of people. He looked carefully at all the faces.
There she is.
He said suddenly. There were 2 men with the girl. He couldn't see their faces, only the backs of their heads, but one of the men was in a green shirt.
Mr. Hollywood.
The man said, and smiled.
Goodbye, Mr. Hollywood.
People in the street turned to look at him, but the man did not see them. He walked up to the doors of the hotel and put a hand into his pocket. Inside, the gun was cold and hard. Chapter 6, A Tea Party. Nick looked through the doors of the tea room in the Empress Hotel. Meg Hudson sat at a table with a man. The man was about 30, or maybe a year or 2 younger. He was tall and brown from the sun. He wore a white shirt, white trousers, and white shoes. He said something to Meg, and she laughed. She looked very happy. A waiter came up to Nick.
Can I get you some tea?
He asked.
No, thanks,
Said Nick.
I'm with the 2 people over there.
And he walked across to Meg's table.
Hello, mystery girl,
Said Nick.
remember me? We met at Whistler. Your name was Jan then. But maybe today it's Meg Hudson.
Meg Hudson looked up at him.
Oh,
She said, and her face went red.
Who is this, Meg?
Asked the man.
this is Nick.
Said Meg.
He's a writer. Nick, this is Craig Winters.
Sometimes called Mr. Hollywood.
Said Nick.
Maybe. But how did you know that?
Asked Craig Winters.
I guessed.
Said Nick.
And I think I'm beginning to understand. Can I ask you a question, Mr. Winters? Does somebody want to kill you?
Craig Winters' face went white.
Kill me.
What are you talking about?
Asked Meg.
Before I tell you, answer this question, please.
Said Nick.
You called me Mr. Hollywood in Whistler. And you wanted the man at the next table, the man with white hair, to hear you. Is that right?
Meg Hudson did not answer at first. Then she said quietly,
Yes.
Why?
asked Nick.
I wanted him to follow you, and not me.
Why?
Nick asked again.
I think he's a detective.
Said Meg.
And I think he's working for my father. I saw him soon after I left Toronto. He followed me.
Meg put her hand on Craig Winter's arm.
My father doesn't like Craig. A month ago, he told me not to see Craig again. I'm not happy, and he knows that. I think he guessed that I'm meeting Craig. And now he wants to find Craig and stop him seeing me.
Stop him.
Said Nick.
Or kill him.
No,
Meg Hudson said.
Daddy doesn't.
The man with white hair pushed me in front of a car in Vancouver.
Nick told her.
And he shot at me in Stanley Park.
What?
Said Meg.
Tell me about this man with white hair.
Winters said suddenly. Nick looked at him.
He's about 60, and he's tall and thin.
He said.
Do you know his name?
Asked Winters.
Vickers.
Said Nick. Craig Winters suddenly looked ill.
Did he follow you to Victoria? Did he follow you here?
I don't know.
Said Nick. He watched Winters.
You're afraid of him? Why? Why does this man Vickers want to kill you, Winters?
Before Craig Winters could answer, Meg's face went white.
Oh no.
She said.
Look. Look over there by the door.
Nick and Craig Winters turned to look. At the door of the tea room stood the man with white hair. He looked up and down the room, and then he saw them, and began to walk across to their table. His hand was in his pocket. For a second or two the three people at the table did not move. Then Craig Winters jumped to his feet.
That's Mr. Hollywood.
He screamed.
That man there?
And he pointed at Nick. The man's hand came out of his pocket, with a gun.
This is for Anna.
He shouted. Nick moved very fast. The tea table went over, and Nick was down on the floor in a second. The shot went over his head, and Meg screamed. At the same time Craig Winters shouted out and put a hand on his arm. There was blood on his white shirt. Then more people began to scream, and two waiters pulled the man with white hair down onto the floor.
Get the police.
Somebody shouted. Chapter 7. At the police station. It was 7:30 p.m. Nick and Meg were in a room at the police station. The man called. Vickers was in a different room, with 3 detectives. There was a doctor with him too. Craig Winters was at the hospital. The door opened and a detective came in with 2 cups of coffee. He put them down on the table and turned to go out again.
Detective Edmonds.
Meg said.
Did the hospital call? Is Craig going to be all right?
Winters.
Detective Edmonds said.
Yes, he's going to be okay.
Can I call the hospital now?
Asked Meg.
I'd like you to wait.
Said Edmonds.
Detective Keat is going to be here in a minute. He's just coming from the airport and...
He looked through the open door.
Ah, here he is now.
A second detective came into the room, and behind him was a tall man with dark hair. Meg stood up quickly.
Daddy?
She cried.
What are you doing here?
The police called me,
said Howard Hudson.
and I flew here at once. Detective Keat met me at the airport. Now, sit down, Meg. I want you to listen to me.
He did not look at Nick. Meg sat down and her father took her hands.
Meg, last week Johnny Vickers came to my house. He wanted to talk about his daughter. You remember Anna, Meg? 3 months ago, she jumped off a bridge in Boston and died. She was young, beautiful, rich, and she didn't want to live.
Why?
Because she loved a man, and the man took her money, ran away, and left her. And the man was called Wood.
No.
Said Meg.
No.
Yes, Meg, yes. He was called Mr. Hollywood.
No.
Shouted Meg. She began to cry.
That's right, Miss Hudson.
Said Detective Keat quietly.
To you, he gave the name Craig Winters. When Anna Vickers knew him, he was Carl Windsor. But he liked all his girlfriends to call him Mr. Hollywood. He took nearly $50,000 from Anna Vickers, and there was a girl before that.
No, it's not true.
Meg shouted.
It is true, Meg.
Said her father.
Windsor gets all his money from rich men's daughters.
Johnny Vickers loved his daughter. He went to her house in Boston after she died. He read her letters and learned about the money and the name Mr. Hollywood.
And when he came to my house, I told him about you, Meg. I said, my daughter's got a new boyfriend, and she calls him Mr. Hollywood. I don't like him, but I can't stop her. She's going away to meet him next week, I think. What can I do? Johnny put his hand on my arm, and he said,
Don't be afraid for your daughter. I'm going to find that man and stop him.
Meg said nothing. Her face was very white. For a minute or two nobody spoke. Then Detective Edmonds said,
Vickers told us all about it, Miss Hudson. He followed you to Whistler and saw you with.
Nick began to understand.
With me, in the cafe. And Meg called me Mr. Hollywood.
Howard Hudson looked at Nick.
You're the travel writer guy, right? Lortz. Nick Lortz.
Said Nick.
Vickers nearly killed me. He shot at me twice, and...
But Howard Hudson was not very interested in Nick. He looked at his daughter again.
How much money did you give him, Meg?
He said. Chapter 8, A Nice Smile. Nick took the evening ferry back to Vancouver. He was tired and hungry, so he went down to get some dinner in the ferry restaurant. The restaurant was busy and there was only one free table. Nick sat down quickly and began to eat. I must get back to work tomorrow, he thought, and forget about millionaires' daughters and men with guns.
Excuse me.
Somebody said.
Can I sit with you?
Nick looked up. There was a pretty girl next to his table. He got up.
It's okay,
he said.
You can have this table. I don't want it.
And he began to move away.
Please don't go.
The girl said.
Stay and finish your dinner.
She smiled at him. It was a nice smile. But Nick knew all about nice smiles.
I'm not hungry,
he said. And he walked quickly out of the restaurant.
Island for sale. There are many islands in the sea near Scotland. This story is about one of these islands. The name of the island is Lana. Lana isn't big, but it's very beautiful. It's very quiet, too. There are no houses or roads or cars on Lana. But there's a castle. The castle is very old. A young Scotsman lives in the castle. The Scotsman's name is Duncan McTavish. Duncan lives in the castle with his dog, Jock. Duncan is very happy on his island. He likes going for walks with Jock. He likes swimming and fishing in his little boat. There are many big rooms in Duncan's castle. They have a lot of old things in them, pictures and heavy tables, chairs and beds. In winter the castle is very cold and dark. Duncan puts on a lot of electric lights in all the rooms. One Monday morning in April, Duncan gets a letter.
What's this?
He asks. He opens the letter. It's from the electricity company. Duncan reads, "Electricity from October to March, £5,000.
Oh. I haven't got £5,000. What can I do?
He's very unhappy.
I can do only one thing, sell my island and my castle.
Duncan telephones a man in London. The man's name is Mr. Moneybags. Mr. Moneybags sells houses and castles.
I want to sell my island and my castle.
Duncan says.
Okay.
Mr. Moneybags says. 2 days later, he telephones Duncan.
Leaping Larry wants to buy Eurus land.
He says.
Leaping who?
Duncan asks.
Leaping Larry. You know, the famous American rock star. He wants to buy your island for his girlfriend.
A rock star.
Duncan says.
Oh, he wants to see the island tomorrow afternoon.
Mr. Moneybags says.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Duncan says.
Yes, of course.
Leaping Larry and his girlfriend are coming to the island by helicopter. They're very late. Duncan and Jock wait a long time. Then the helicopter arrives. A tall man with long dark hair gets down from it. He's about 45 years old. There's a girl with him. She's about 20 and has long yellow hair. There's a small animal with her. The animal has long white hair.
Hi,
The man says.
I'm Leaping Larry. And this is my girlfriend, Roxanne.
Hi.
Roxanne says.
This is my dog, Bobo.
Larry looks at the castle.
Look at that old castle, Roxanne.
He says.
Don't you love it, honey?
Roxanne doesn't smile. It's only an old castle. Leaping Larry and Roxanne go into the castle. It's very dark. Leaping Larry can't see. He falls down.
Where are the lights?
He asks.
I'm sorry.
Duncan says.
There isn't any light. The company stopped my electricity this morning.
I want some hot food.
Roxanne says.
I'm sorry.
Duncan says.
But I can't make hot food. I haven't got any electricity. But there is some cold food.
Cold food.
Roxanne says.
No, thank you. I'm going to bed. But first I want a hot bath. And Bobo wants a bath too.
I'm very sorry.
Duncan says.
But there's no hot water.
No lights. No food. No hot water.
Roxanne says.
I don't like this place.
Now, honey.
Leaping Larry says.
Don't call me honey.
Roxanne says.
Let's go, Bobo.
Roxanne and Bobo go to bed. Larry and Duncan eat cold food and talk. Jack watches them. Suddenly Roxanne screams. Duncan, Larry and Jack run to her room. Roxanne is in bed with Bobo.
Honey, what's wrong?
Larry asks.
There was a noise in the room.
Roxanne says.
What was it?
Duncan starts to smile.
Why are you smiling?
Roxanne says.
She's very angry.
Look at Jock.
Duncan says. Jock is under the bed. He has a mouse in his mouth.
A mouse.
Roxanne says. She screams again. In the morning, Duncan and Leaping Larry are waiting. Roxanne and Bobo are late. They get up at 11 o'clock.
Good morning.
Duncan says. Roxanne doesn't answer. She says to Larry.
Larry, I don't like this place. I want to go home.
But, honey.
Larry says.
Don't call me honey.
Roxanne says.
This castle is old, dark, and very cold. There's no electricity, no food, and no hot water. And I don't like it. Do you understand?
Listen, honey.
Larry says.
We can build a big new house here. Our friends from California can come and stay.
Duncan looks at Jock. Jock looks at Duncan.
Build a big new house.
They think.
Oh no.
Leaping Larry says.
We want to see the island.
Okay.
Duncan says.
We can go in my boat.
Duncan, Larry, and Roxanne get into Duncan's boat. Jock gets in too. Bobo is with Roxanne. It's a beautiful day, but Roxanne isn't happy.
What do you do all day?
She asks Duncan.
I go for walks.
Duncan says.
Sometimes I swim. And sometimes I catch fish.
Oh?
Roxanne says.
That isn't very interesting.
Listen, honey.
Larry says.
We can make the island interesting. I know people with film companies. They can come here and make films. Hundreds of films.
Duncan looks at Jock. Jock looks at Duncan.
Film companies.
They think.
Oh no.
Duncan is very unhappy. He doesn't want to sell his island and his castle to Larry. He doesn't want film companies or Larry's friends on the island.
But what can Duncan do?
The electricity company wants £5,000. He has no money. He can't stay in his castle. Duncan, Larry, and Roxanne are all sitting in Duncan's boat. Jock and Bobo are with them. Suddenly, Jock sees a rabbit on the island. Jock loves catching rabbits. He jumps into the sea and starts to swim to the island.
Bobo is in the water.
Roxanne screams.
Jump into the sea, Larry. Get Bobo.
But Larry doesn't move.
Why are you waiting?
Roxanne says.
Jump in.
But, honey.
Larry says.
I can't swim. Can't swim.
Roxanne says. She is very angry.
Look.
Duncan says.
Bobo is okay. He's having a good time.
Bobo is swimming in the water with Jack. But Roxanne is very angry with Larry.
You don't love me,
she says.
And you don't love me.
Larry says.
You only love Bobo.
You're right,
Roxanne says. She stands in the boat and starts to hit Larry.
Don't do that.
Duncan says. The boat moves. Roxanne falls into the water. She starts to scream. Roxanne is making a lot of noise. Jack sees Roxanne in the water with Bobo. What are they doing? Are they playing a new game? Jack wants to play too. He swims to Bobo.
Go away,
Roxanne screams. Duncan brings the boat near Roxanne. Roxanne gets into the boat. Then Bobo gets into the boat. Roxanne is very angry.
Take me back to California now,
she says to Larry. Later, Larry, Roxanne, and Bobo get into their helicopter.
Goodbye.
Duncan says. Larry and Roxanne don't answer. The helicopter goes away. Duncan smiles at Jack. He's very happy.
Leaping Larry isn't going to buy our island,
he says.
That's good.
But Duncan has big money problems. Leaping Larry doesn't want to buy the island. But where can Duncan get £5,000 for the electricity company? Later, Duncan telephones Mr. Moneybags in London.
Leaping Larry telephone May.
Mr. Moneybags says.
He doesn't like your island. He doesn't want to buy it. And I'm not going to sell it for you now. It's your problem. Goodbye.
Duncan goes for a long walk with Jack. He's very unhappy. They walk to a place across the island. And there Duncan sees a girl. She's looking at the sea and she's painting a picture. Near her is a small boat.
Good afternoon,
Duncan says. The girl looks at Duncan. She's beautiful. He likes her.
Who are you?
She asks.
What do you want?
I'm Duncan McTavish.
Duncan says.
I live here. Lana is my island. And this is my dog, Jock.
Jack looks at the girl. He likes her too.
Lana is your island?
The girl says.
Oh. I'm Jean Stewart. I'm a teacher. I work in a school across the sea. Today is a holiday and the school is closed. I came here in my boat. I wanted to paint your island. The light is very good and the colors are very beautiful. I can paint good pictures here.
Duncan looks at Jean's picture.
Ease.
He says.
Your picture is very good.
Thank you.
Jean says. Duncan and Jean talk for a long time.
Where do you live?
Jean asks.
I live in a castle.
Duncan says.
Come and see it.
Duncan, Jean, and Jack go to the castle.
Your castle is beautiful.
Jean says.
Ease.
Duncan says.
But it's very cold and dark. There's no electricity. I have no money. I love my island very much. But I can't make money from it.
Jean looks at the castle. Suddenly she says.
Yes, you can.
How?
Duncan asks.
People can come here for holidays.
Jean says.
They can paint pictures of your island. I can teach them. And they can stay in your castle. We can make a lot of money.
Duncan looks at Jock. Jock looks at Duncan.
You're right.
Duncan says, "Now McTavish painting holidays are very famous. Every year many visitors come to the island. They stay in the castle. They go for walks and paint beautiful pictures. They take their pictures back to their homes. The rooms in the castle aren't cold and dark now. Duncan and Jean have a lot of money. There is no problem with the electricity company. And Jean makes very good food. The visitors are very happy. Duncan and Jean are married now. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Jack loves playing with the children. Duncan often sits in his little boat. Sometimes he catches a fish, but usually he sleeps. He's a happy man.